Though all the Legion Astartes had vital roles in the Great Crusade, there was one above all that probably formed the bedrock of the growing Imperium with its fortifications and place close to the Emperor's side. Though their Primarch was found in the empire led by the ice world of Inwit, the official home of the Legion is none other than Terra itself, and it is to the cradle of humanity that we have come today. I so hope these stealth systems don't fail me now. Though they seemed emotionless and uncompromising, leading to a level of animosity between them and the other legions, they won great honour in their campaigns and helped shape the galaxy to the Emperor's designs. They stood, as far as we know, entirely loyal in the Horus Heresy, being the first to hear of the betrayal of Honest Van III, and though they were less involved in the major engagements of that terrible war, their role cannot be forgotten, especially at the end. Though their Primarch is gone, assumed dead, the chapters formed from his legion fight on with honour to continue his legacy. His name was Rogal Dorn, the Praetorian of Terra, and his sons were the 7th of the Legion Astartes. Named by the Emperor himself, they are the defenders of Terra, the Imperial Fists. My name is Michael for Tactica Imperialis, and welcome to the final part of Legions, a 40k Stories mini-series. The 7th Legion were founded sometime in the Unification Wars, not first, but early enough to help conquer much of Terra. Interestingly, whilst most legions recruited from primarily one area, the 7th recruited from all over Terra, taking in recruits who seemed to have the greatest endurance, but who coincidentally seemed to be rather taciturn in nature. They took many regions, including the mountain range once known as the Himalayas, and they built many of the defences of Terra as well via mighty fortresses, though they did not garrison heavily, as their goal was always conquest, not defence. It was during the Unification Wars that the Legion also earned its name. Some who saw their work remarked that it was as if the Emperor's hand had descended like an unbreakable fist, and it said the Emperor liked the idea enough to christen the 7th Legion as the Imperial Fists. Once they'd scoured the cradle of humanity, the 7th joined the push through the Sol system, most notably defeating pirates and even demons in the unheard war in the orbital cities above Uranus. The pirates attacked a recently integrated human civilization known as the Azurites, and though the Fists drove them off, a Psycho made it to the primary Azurite station and infected it with a psychic plague that killed all who heard a victim scream. The 50 Fists who were deployed silenced their audio receptors or otherwise deafened themselves, but were forced to lay down their lives to destroy the station and the plague itself. What makes this campaign particularly special is that it was the catalyst for the Emperor to toll the Bell of Lost Souls, a titanic bell within the Tower of Heroes in the Imperial Palace, for the very first time. It's now tolled whenever a great Imperial hero dies, or, interestingly, whenever a Grey Knight is slain in battle. The Imperial Fists fought in many other wars once the Great Crusade left Sol, both at the head of campaigns and as supporting forces, and they became renowned for siege warfare in both attack and defence, as well as for all-out lightning assaults. Their policy of fortress building and consolidation on Terra continued as they continued to conquer. They would always ensure that the societies they left behind were stable and well defended with bastions and installations. Unlike the 13th Legion, the future Ultramarines, however, the 7th were not empire builders, nor were they rulers. Their reserved and somewhat grim nature meant they would never be suited for diplomacy or the like, but their mindset toward the Great Crusade was also the antithesis of the whole idea. The Crusade was exactly what its name said it was in the mind of the Imperial Fists, a military crusade to unite humanity and, in the words of a future First Captain, an expression of humanity's desire to master space. As a result, the 7th set themselves up as warriors above all, not civil leaders or anything beyond crusaders. This, combined with their tendency to consolidate power as well as conquer, meant that people saw the Fists in two different but positive lights. Analysts would say that the Imperial Fists were akin to the bedrock on which the Imperium was built, whilst others would call them the ultimate embodiment of the Emperor's vision for humanity. It would be about 160 years before the outbreak of the Horus Heresy that the Imperial Fists were united with their Primarch, found leading an empire on the tidal-locked ice world of Inwit in northern Segmentum Tempestus, pretty much due south from Terra actually. There resided the 7th Primarch, also the 7th to be rediscovered by some sort of coincidence, the future Praetorian of Terra, Rogal Dorn. Rogal Dorn arrived on the ice world of Inwit when the Primarchs were scattered by the Chaos Gods. Little to nothing is known of his early life, but it's assumed he survived on his own for some period of time before finding or being found by one of the nomadic tribes that made up the planet's populace. He was taken in by the House of Dorn and named Rogal while still a boy, so he won't have been alone for too long, I suspect. Like all Primarchs, he rose through the ranks quickly, and before long he was the leader of his house and the ice caste it was part of. Inwit had also built itself a small empire among the stars since before the coming of the Emperor, and eventually Dorn was ruler of this domain as well. He found a titanic shipwreck orbiting Inwit, a relic from the Dark Age of technology called the Phalanx, and he rebuilt it as a mighty bastion and fortress in the stars. Not content to stop there, he reinforced the fleets and armies of the Empire, creating new vessels that far outshone their predecessors and probably making Inwit a formidable nut to crack should the Imperium have been forced to take it on. However, there was no need for such a question to even be asked, as there were no hostilities when the Emperor came. It is unknown how long he led his empire before the Great Crusade arrived, but Dorn is said to have been aboard the Phalanx to greet the Emperor personally. What was said between them is unknown, but Dorn was renowned for his loyalty to the Emperor in later times, so I suspect the reunion was, well, as happy as could be expected from the 7th Primarch, known to be rather grim in personality, rather like his sons, though woe betide any who mistook him for emotionless. His anger was said to be terrifying. His reunion with the Imperial Fists was interesting. He didn't speak to them. Not once. Though the Legion knelt in fealty to him, including its master at the time, Matthias, he did not speak until he had seen them fight in combat. Once he had, he gave Matthias a single word of thanks before appointing him as the High Castellan of the empire he had ruled. Whether that meant Dorn was still in overall command, I'm not sure, but since Matthias was still a legionary, I assume he answered to the Primarch anyway. The population of the empire was then raised up to become Astartes. 30 regiments were raised, so while I can't give you an accurate figure, I suspect it was a good few thousand. Not too many, because the 7th never got far above 100,000 members even at the best of times. With that done, the Phalanx was returned to Dorn as the flagship and fortress monastery of the Imperial Fists. This effectively meant that the Legion was fleet-based, as their fortress monastery was not on a particular world. Whilst Inwit remained their nominal homeworld for a while, it's known that once he'd finished the recruitment and left his former home, Dorn never returned. Such would be the way the Imperial Fists operated: conquer, consolidate, recruit en masse, leave. It is unknown how much Dorn changed the 7th Legion following his return, as their nature and fighting style already appeared similar to his. The ideals of Dorn aligned with those of the Great Crusade, and the Imperial Fists were the exemplars of his dreams and mindset on Inwit, so I doubt much had to be massively modified. Not even the name was changed, which may have just been a deference to the Emperor, not sure. Given how swift and total the integration of Primarch and Legion was said to be, I expect little to nothing changed at all before the Phalanx left Inwit for the final time and the reunited Imperial Fists rejoined the Great Crusade. Under the leadership of Rogal Dorn, the Imperial Fists pretty much carried on as they were doing before his arrival. As previously stated, their doctrines were already pretty well aligned with Dorn's, and so not much needed to change. They continued to fortify the worlds they conquered, but never garrisoned beyond maybe a few squads of Astartes, tops. They recruited heavily from many worlds, creating a cultural melting pot within the Legion, but as they would often recruit large enough numbers to create entire formations, it allowed these cultures to survive without friction for a very long time. These recruits were never psychers, however. Dorn didn't have a major issue with the creation of the Librarius project, but was against the idea of psychers within the Imperial Fists, and so never created a Librarius for the 7th. Their main trump card relative to the other Legionaries Astartes, however, was their fleet, the largest of all Astartes' fleets, with around 1,500 ships, including the indomitable Phalanx. The Imperial Fists were second to none where War in the Void was concerned, and their boarding actions were also peerless. They basically just applied their siege warfare principles to space combat as much as war on the ground, since, in their mind, spaceships were basically just fortresses in space. Their combat record was just as impressive, said to be second only to Horus Lupercal and the Lunar Wolves, though I'm sure the Ultramarines and Dark Angels would claim something similar. Though they planned and won many victories, they were just as capable when thrust into an unintended war zone, such as when one of their fleets was spat out in the Consus Drift by a specific warp disturbance that had claimed many ships throughout history. What followed was a void battle against the Drift clans, some of the best space fighters never seen by the Imperium. Living up to their reputation, the Fists turned the tide of their ambush so effectively as to stun the clans into surrender, recruiting a large number of them into a company that became renowned in turn as Void Fighters. Dorn himself was an excellent commander, one of the finest military minds even amongst the Primarchs, said to be a balance between the discipline of Guilliman, the courage of Lionel Johnson, and the zeal and flair of Leman Russ. I have to admit that's a pretty impressive combination. He was considered by Guilliman as one of his dauntless few, the most trusted of his brothers along with Russ, Verus Manus and Sanguinius, alongside whose legions the Ultramarines could never lose. Dorn probably won a lot of respect from his brothers. Horus remarked that the Lunar Wolves attacking an Imperial Fist bastion would be an endless siege, but his personality and that of his sons caused its fair share of problems too. He could not physically compromise nor lie, not even to spare the feelings of others, and this grated on more than one of his brothers just as the similar mannerisms of his sons annoyed the other legions. The most infamous example was, of course, Perturabo. The Iron Warriors were also siege experts alongside the Imperial Fists, and when asked by Fulgrim if the 7th could withstand the 4th, Dorn's confirmation aggravated the Lord of Iron to the point that the two never worked together again. Dorn also clashed with Alfarius Omegon numerous times in the Great Crusade, notably in a campaign against human rulers known as the World Prince, as well as with Conrad Kurz after Fulgrim told the 7th Primarch about Kurz's visions of the coming Horus Heresy. Funny how Fulgrim seems to be involved a lot, though I'm sure that's just coincidence. Kurz took offence to Dorn confronting him, or something like that, and Dorn only survived the assault of his lightning claws because, well, he was a Primarch with advanced physiology that allowed it. Perhaps because of these incidents and his general nature, Dorn was passed over for War Master, with the role going instead to Horus. The Lord of the 16th Legion had a knack for diplomacy as well as combat, and was much more popular as a result, though the ever-loyal Dorn had no issue with it and supported Horus's ascension openly. When it came to closeness with the Emperor, however, the Imperial Fists outranked probably even the 16th Legion. They were commonly used as his Praetorian guard when the Lord of Mankind deemed to go to war, along with the Adeptus Custodes, and quite often they acted under his direct orders. A notable example came when the 7th joined the Emperor in the taking of Ophelia 7, now the second holiest world in the modern Imperium and the most senior of the Cardinal worlds. This was epitomised with Dorn being selected to fortify the Imperial Palace after Ullanor, earning him the epithet of Praetorian of Terra, as well as the Imperial Fists having their official homeworld moved from Inwit to Terra. This effectively pulled the 7th Legion away from the front lines of the Crusade, and it seems that the entire Legion was pulled back, even if not everyone was back home by the time it all went wrong. Official records state their numbers at this time as a shade over 98,000 Astartes, though I'd put a margin of error on that could make it anywhere between probably 95 and 100,000. The Imperial Fists were the first Loyalist Legion to receive word of the Horus Heresy, when the frigate the Eisenstein was discovered by Dorn as it ejected its warp drive and re-entered real space. The Fists themselves had been having difficulty due to warp storms that would continue to hamper them. When he spoke to the crew of the Eisenstein, Dorn initially refused to believe that Horus and co had turned traitor on Istvan III, but was brought around by individuals such as Nathaniel Garrow and the Remembrancer Mercedes Oliton, who showed the Praetorian what her implants had captured. He brought the crew of the frigate back to Sol, though they were then almost immediately arrested and imprisoned on Luna for fear of corruption, whilst about a third of the Imperial Fist fleet was dispatched to Istvan III. With the post of War Master vacated and being the only suitable candidate around due to the war in the Webway, Dorn assumed command of the Imperium's armies and assembled the Retribution fleet that travelled to Istvan V, obviously unaware of the fall of Perturabo, Kurz, Alfarius and Lorgar. Notably, his own legion were not present despite being sent first, as they were continually hampered by warp interference and thus unable to intervene. The first they would learn regarding the developments of the Horus Heresy came when they were attacked by the, in their eyes, still loyal Iron Warriors in the FAL system, where they were effectively pinned in place and unable to transmit messages because of the Immaterium's meddling. Despite losing their commander to the storms before Perturabo and co even arrived to spring their trap, the Fists had not only deployed effectively in anticipation of an ambush, but fought with a level of skill I doubt the Iron Warriors could have matched or expected. They had less armour, but better weapons and their renowned space combat abilities, and slowly but surely they outthought and outplayed the 4th Legion and turned the tide to the point they would likely have killed Perturabo himself given time. They would not have said time to finish off the Iron Warriors, however, as Dorn's attempts to call his sons back finally succeeded after months of failure. Some say the Chaos Gods had realised that Perturabo was going to lose and so let the message through. As they had no idea if Terra itself was under siege or what else had transpired in the galaxy, the Fists decided to withdraw and return home, though it would cost them dearly to do so, sparing the Lord of Iron from defeat or even death. With the benefit of hindsight, they probably wouldn't have, but such is the fog of war. Not all of them made it back to Terra or even in one piece, and their commander in the battle ended up in Imperium Secundus instead, more on him later. And I suspect that at least some ships will have been lost in the warp too because of the ruin storm that had likely been the source of all their problems, or at least some of them. All the while, Dorn had been further fortifying the Imperial Palace in preparation for the eventual arrival of the traitors, but there were other problems a little closer to home to deal with first as the Schism of Mars broke out. The veteran companies of the Imperial Fists had been the ones who returned with the Primarch initially to Terra, and 4 of these and the first Captain Sigismund were sent to aid the defenders of the Red Planet against the corrupted fabricator general of the Mechanicum, Kelbor Hal. Assumedly thanks to the corrupting influence of the newly opened vaults of Morovec, the Dark Mechanicum won a pretty decisive victory and forced the Imperium to withdraw. but before they left, the Loyalists managed to evacuate huge amounts of material to Terra, since the cradle of humanity was now effectively cut off from its main forge and factory. Mars was placed under Imperial blockade in response, and though said blockade was never broken, even when Horus finally arrived, it would not be until after the main Horus Heresy had concluded that the Red Planet finally fell back into Imperial hands once more. The Dark Mechanica may have been the largest force to rise up in the Sol system, but they likely weren't the only ones. The Alpha Legion had implanted sleeper agents within the system to cause trouble as the traitors came later, but it's probable that anti-Imperial settlements had to be put down by either the Imperial Fists or the Imperial Army. Aside from the defense of Terra and Sol, the Imperial Fists were also involved in other operations throughout the heresy, seemingly related to counterintelligence for the most part, as waging massive campaigns would have pulled them away from home. We do know, however, that some could not answer Dorn's call to return home, as the force left to garrison and watch over the world of Hydra Caudatus lost its navigator, and so was stuck there as the Iron Warriors launched an all-out invasion with great success. It was a legion versus about 200 marines, so hardly a surprising result. We sadly don't have any specific examples of said operations or battles beside Hydra Caudatus, but such is the nature of espionage, which combined with the general chaos of the heresy has meant many things have been lost or forgotten. The final preparations in Sol saw the system organised into various spheres of defence. The first covered Neptune and Pluto, the second the area around Jupiter, whilst the third was effectively the blockade of Mars. The fourth covered the final approach between Mars and Terra, whilst Dorn oversaw the fifth and last personally, Luna and Terra itself. The Imperium was ready, and after Horus finally won the titanic battle in Beta Garman, mustering point for the Censure fleet that travelled to Prospero and said to be the gateway to the Sol system, the final chapter in the Horus Heresy was about to begin. The battles in the Sol system leading up to the Siege of Terra are known collectively as the Solar War, pitting the spheres of Imperial defence against the traitor fleet. The Imperial Fists fought well, and the highlight came in the Battle of Pluto. Despite being responsible for the fifth sphere, Dorn and the Phalanx came to the edge of Sol in order to fight off the Alpha Legion, who had activated many sleeper cells within the system, including on Terra, as part of a distraction. There it is believed that Dorn slew Alpharius in single combat, though as we've discussed previously, it's kinda hard to know with the 20th Legion whether it was truly him. This decisive victory was not enough, however, as the traitors eventually made planetfall on Terra itself and the siege of the Imperial Palace began. The remaining Imperial Fists led the defence along with the Blood Angels and the White Scars, with Dorn and a portion of the Legion embarked in a massive gunship known as the Sky Fortress to provide mobile reinforcement. The main action of this force came as relief from the assault of the Thousand Suns in Magnus the Red, though the Sky Fortress was shot down in the process of deployment, but I'm sure that elements of the 7th were spread across the Imperial Palace fighting the various traitor waves. The Terran Fortress Monastery of the Fists also came under siege from the Iron Warriors once Perturabo was satisfied with the damage he'd done to the palace, though whether this was the true one or the Phalanx, I'm not 100%. Dorn was also brought along by the Emperor to Horus's flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, but he was teleported elsewhere on the battle barge and so was unable to reach the bridge in time to prevent both Sanguinius's and Horus's deaths, along with the fall of the Emperor. He was pretty much first on the scene in the aftermath, however. He helped bring their bodies back to Terra and received the last instructions of the Emperor before the Lord of Mankind was interred on the Golden Throne. Dorn was distraught and furious following what he saw as his failure to protect the Emperor, and he led the Imperial Fists on a crusade of vengeance and penitence that may or may not have been part of the Great Scouring. Exactly how long this took and how much it conquered is unclear, though it is thought a large portion of the Iron Warriors' holdings were taken back as part of it, but it is known he was summoned back by Lord Commander Guilliman for the announcement of the Codex Astartes. Dorn was vehemently opposed to the Codex, though the exact reasons are unknown, and he got backing from Leman Russ and supposedly Vulcan on the issue as well. What followed is known as the Codex Crisis, and saw harsh words and even small amounts of fire exchanged as the Imperium bordered on a second civil war. Eventually, however, Dorn relented, though it's believed he needed to meditate for a week in a full-body torture device known as the Pain Glove in order to realise what needed to happen. Unfortunately, the Imperial Fists were still not on board with the idea, and so Dorn effectively had to show them what he had seen in the Pain Glove. In a symbolic representation of that, he threw the entire Legion against the Iron Warriors in what became known as the Iron Cage Incident. Perturabo had laid out an elaborate trap and kill zone on the world of Sebastus IV, and Dorn committed the Fists to defeating him, but they were slaughtered en masse. It got to the point that their formations broke down and they were using their dead brothers as cover, but it's believed that the Iron Warriors would have to effectively wipe themselves out in order to destroy the 7th in turn. After almost 4 weeks, the Ultramarines arrived to bail the Fists out, and in the aftermath, the Legion was just about willing to split into chapters according to the Codex. It is believed that the remnants of the Fists split into 3, though it may have been 4 as there seems to be a level of debate surrounding the Soul Drinkers. The Crimson Fists were said to be the newest recruits as well as the most accepting of the Codex, whilst the Black Templars were the most zealous and least accepting, and the remaining Imperial Fists were effectively Dorn loyalists. Many other chapters have been formed from Imperial Fist gene seed in those early days, though exactly which founding they're from is a little less clear, and despite going along with Guilliman's proposal, Dorn put a plan in place in secret that would effectively allow the Legion to reform. This was known as the Last Wall Protocol, and it's actually been activated only once over the past 10 or 11 millennia, all the way back in the War of the Beast. However, Dorn himself was not the one to order this reformation, as he's believed to have died during the First Black Crusade or in some other battle against the forces of chaos. I say believed because his body was never actually recovered, only one of his hands was found, the left one I believe, and during the aforementioned War of the Beast, Vulcan told the chapter master of the time that he would speak highly of him to Dorn, so is he dead? Even without their Primarch, the Imperial Fists have continued in a very similar vein to their legionary selves, being experts at siege warfare. I assume they're still Masters of the Void as well, given they have the Phalanx etc. on side. One of their most renowned warriors, second only to Dorn in martial knowledge, penned an addendum to the Codex Astartes known as the Book of Five Spheres, which is likely but not definitely a reference to the spheres of defence in Sol during the Heresy. They have suffered grievous losses and near annihilation more than once in their history, most infamously being reduced to just one Astartes in the War of the Beast, but every time they've rebuilt and come back stronger. They officially left Terra behind and moved their fortress monastery back aboard the Phalanx after said war, becoming effectively a crusading chapter like they had been as a legion, but their unofficial moniker as the Defenders of Terra remains to this day. Their current chapter master is Vaughn Hagen, elected in late M41 after the death of his predecessor against Tyranids, but as he seems relatively new in the job, his actions as chapter master are not too well documented. If Rogal Dorn is still around and watching over his sons, then I suspect he'll be very proud and impressed with them, though why he'd be hiding from them at all I have absolutely no idea. And so, with the tale of the 7th Legion told, let's tell a few stories of famous Imperial Fists. The Templars were something akin to the first company within the Imperial Fists, the greatest warriors of the Legion with unmatched zeal and determination who were sworn as guardians of the Temple of Oaths on the Phalanx, a place dedicated to the ideals of the Great Crusade. Their leader was Sigismund, the Terran-born first captain of the 7th Legion, and thus second only to Dorn himself, with all but unparalleled authority over the Fists. As tradition dictated, he was also the finest warrior within the Legion, perhaps even within the entire Legion Astartes. His name was mentioned in the same breath as renowned individuals such as Abaddon and Sevatar, and some claim only the Primarchs were possessed of greater martial skill. A good example of this would be the fact that Sigismund duelled Angron during a period of joint campaigns with the World Eaters. How well he did is unknown, but he became fast friends and oath brothers with Angron's equerry Khan, who he also duelled with frequently in that period, so he can't have fared too poorly against the Red Angel even if he still would have lost. Nicknamed the Black Knight after this stint with the 12th, Sigismund was just as zealous as the rest of his brothers in the Templars, perhaps even more so, as his hot-headedness was a conversation point between Dorn and Malcador the Sigillite. He believed that the Great Crusade would never end, and that even if the Imperium was one day finally secured, the Legion Astartes would spend the rest of time defending it. He may not have known it, but he was almost prophetically correct in this insight given what has transpired in modern times. Unsurprisingly, Sigismund was with Dorn when the Fists found the Eisenstein, and initially he was tasked to lead the Retribution fleet to Istvan. However, in conversation with the Remembrancer Euphrates Keeler, he received a vision from the future living saint of two possible fates, a forgotten death in space, or eternal war. It appears he was affected so profoundly by this that he actively chose the latter, requesting to Dorn that he stay by the Primarch's side, which Dorn agreed to without question. Sigismund was chosen as the commander of the Imperial Fists sent to Mars, with their forces focusing on the forges that produced Astartes material, but his mission was only ever about taking resources before evacuating, rather than actually taking the Red Planet back off the Dark Mechanicum. He was later tasked by Dorn with purging the Sol system of all elements of the traitor legions. Whether this meant killing the Crusader host that Dorn had imprisoned at the start of the heresy is unclear, but it may well have been, given many of them have unknown fates. Eventually, Sigismund owned up to Dorn about his reasons for wanting to stay with him, and suffice it to say that Dorn was unimpressed, saying that Sigismund's pride had led to this error and it was not too dissimilar from that of the traitor Primarchs. For the sake of morale, Sigismund was actually kept in the role of first captain despite offering Dorn his life, but the Primarch effectively disowned the Black Knight, which may explain why he was posted to lead the first sphere of Sol's defence rather than being stationed on Terra or nearer to it. He survived the Battle of Pluto and was able to return to Terra, forming part of the defenders there. It appeared that he and Dorn managed to reconcile, at least a little bit, as when Dorn travelled to vengeful spirit, he left the first captain in command of the remaining defenders. He was the best warrior left after all, so it could have just been pragmatism. Before the siege began, however, Dorn christened Sigismund as the Emperor's Champion, tasking him with seeking out the greatest champions of the traitor forces and defeating them in single combat. He was outfitted with the finest weapons and armour to facilitate this. Given he'd never been bested before, it's perhaps little surprise that he was unstoppable and defeated all that he fought, though we don't actually have any names for his opponents or any hint of the numbers he faced. One assumes he was one of the most vehement opponents of the Codex Astartes even after the Iron Cage that he must have fought in and survived. He was chosen to be first chapter master or high marshal of the Black Templars when they were founded. We're unsure if the entire chapter was formed from the Templars of the Legion, but a combination of that and Sigismund's own epithet will have undoubtedly served as inspiration for the name and heraldry. Sigismund had a huge impact on his chapter even beyond aesthetics. The Emperor's Champion is a role that still exists today, and it's possible that their belief in the Imperial Creed stems from that conversation with Keeler all that time before. His eventual fate is unknown, but we can make a pretty good guess. He spent a great deal of time hunting Abaddon in what had been the Sons of Horus, never losing his hatred for the traitors or his drive for the eternal crusade he had sworn the Black Templars would undertake. He finally caught up to the new War Master of Chaos on Uralan in the First Black Crusade, just after Abaddon had been gifted the demon sword known as Draknien. The two fought, and though the outcome is uncertain, only Abaddon walked away, implying that Sigismund was killed, sacrificed or otherwise incapacitated, and never heard from again. If you wish to know more of his descendants, we discuss the Black Templars in more detail as part of a separate, more recent log. After Sigismund requested to stay with Dorn, command of the Retribution fleet instead fell to Captain Yonad, holder of the title of Fleet Master in the late Crusade. However, Yonad was killed in the warp storms that eventually stranded the Imperial Fists in the Foul system, forcing command to be passed again to his protege, Alexis Polux, captain of the 405th Company and part of Dorn's advisory council. Polux was an Inuit native who had joined up along with his brother, but his sibling fell short in the final trials and died, leaving Alexis alone and believing he should have been the one to fail. This feeling of inadequacy would kind of persist through his life, as he never felt himself as worthy as the other Imperial Fist officers, but it actually served him well. It gave him a measure of humility. When called to lead at Fal, Pollux refused to brave the warp storms in an attempt to leave and instead kept the Retribution fleet prepared for an ambush his gut told him was coming. He was right, as he so often was, as the Iron Warriors arrived and tried to drive a wedge into the Retribution fleet, but Pollux's deployment and skill and the discipline of the Imperial Fists allowed them not only to survive, but to counterattack and prepare to carry the day. Pollux was actually forced to abandon his flagship mid-fight, leading a boarding action onto an Iron Warriors vessel in order to make his final escape. Though he of course complied with Dorn's order to withdraw when it finally came through, he's recorded as regretting it later given what might well have been, but he wouldn't be telling Dorn that personally for a fair old time. His navigators locked on to what they believed to be the Astronomicon, but it turned out to be the Pharos beacon which guided them to Imperium Secundus and Macragge. Whilst there, Pollux took a leaf from his Primarch's book and helped to fortify the defences of the Ultramarines' homeworld, and he actually forged a fast friendship with someone who, on principle, he perhaps should have hated, the Iron Warrior warsmith Barabbas Dantioch. If I called him Barbarous when I covered the Iron Warriors, then I apologise. Eventually, the Night Lords and Conrad Kurz launched an attack on Imperium Secundus, and it's thought that Pollux actually fought the Night Haunter personally at one point. If so, kudos to him for even surviving given what he did to Dorn. He and Dantioch made a fine pair, with the Warsmith coordinating information and the captain living up to his command reputation that had seen him rise so high in the 7th Legion, and the bond between them was confirmed as Pollux chose to stay with Dantioch rather than be teleported back to Macragge by the Pharos. Both were therefore present for the Battle of Sotha as the Night Lords attempted to secure the beacon, with Pollux commanding the forces on the defences of Dantioch's design. The defence was inspired and may well have been successful were it not for demonic intervention bypassing it, forcing drastic action to be taken. At the climax of the battle, Dantioch sacrificed his own life to overload the Pharos, killing many Light Lords and allowing reinforcements under Guilliman to arrive directly in system and finally turn the battle for the Loyalists. He died in Pollux's arms, with the Imperial Fist acknowledging the Iron Warrior as his brother in a scene I doubt he ever expected to play out after Fal. We have to assume that Pollux remained in Imperium Secundus following the Battle of Sotha, since there was no way for getting home thanks to the Ruin Storm. He's not recorded as being present for the Siege of Terra, meaning his forces likely accompanied the Ultramarines or Dark Angels to Sol, as opposed to the Blood Angels who managed to make it in time. In the aftermath of the heresy, Pollux was rewarded/honoured with command of the other second founding chapter, the Crimson Fists, thanks to his cool head and rational thinking. This, along with the ready acceptance of the Codex, would be a defining trait for the chapter early on. The name comes from a tradition in the Imperial Fists, but when a new chapter master ascended. He and Dorn would cut their palms and share a bloody handshake to solidify their bond. The Crimson Fists were also fleet-based for a long time, and only took a home about 9 millennia later, setting up a fortress monastery on the agri-world known as Rin's World in Ultima Segmentum. No idea who Rin is though. As for Alexis Polux, he served as chapter master for about 800 years, but was killed by Xenos known as Scythians who used poison weapons extensively. In the aftermath, the Crimson Fists got vengeance for their founder's death in a massive campaign that effectively sent the Scythians into the shadows for the rest of time, as they've yet to engage the Imperium in the open ever since. Rogal Dorn's bodyguard were known as the Huskars, led by a captain known as Arcamus. He actually took the name from one of the recruits he had joined with, but that died in their final training, saving him in fact. He, along with Captain Yonad, were part of the first 20 aspirants to be trained under Dorn's guidance, the very first of the Imperial Fists drawn from Inuit as part of an unofficial brotherhood known as the First. It appears that he and the Fleet Master were the only ones of that group to make it as far as the Horus Heresy, as Arcamus was known also as the last of the First. It could be that others had made it as well but died early on, like Yonad did. He was renowned as being extremely cool-headed, far more attuned to Dorn's emotions than Sigismund would ever be. Arcamus' combat record is actually unknown, assumedly he fought wherever Dorn did, which would help track his movements, but his first and only recorded action was in the Solar War. He recruited the aid of a gene cult psyker from Luna known as Andromeda 17. Why they were allowed to practice their abilities post-Nicaea, given they were neither astropath nor navigator, not so clear. And he used her to track an Alpha Legion cell operating in Sol and causing havoc. This cell had actually clashed with the Huskars, which is assumedly how the Fist knew about them. Through her, he was able to learn of the planned invasion of Pluto, specifically the communications station on the moon of Hydra that, if taken, would leave the rest of the planet vulnerable and the Imperium none the wiser. Arcamus took a contingent of Huskars without Dorn to Hydra in an attempt to stop the Alpha Legion, but was struck down personally by the Primarch Alfarius, who had in fact been leading the cell all that time thanks to swapping minds with a subordinate. It was at this time that Dorn and the Phalanx arrived, though whether they were responding to a distress call or following Arcamus' lead is unclear, and the Primarchs had their duel. As they did, Alfarius tried to claim that he was fighting for the future as opposed to for Horus, and given their interactions for the Cabal he likely was, but Dorn refused to listen to his brother's urgings to switch sides. It appeared for a moment that the 20th Primarch had managed to gain the upper hand as he went to impale Dorn with his weapon the Pale Spear, but Arcamus, despite being mortally wounded, was able to deflect the strike by grabbing the hilt of the spear. This gave Dorn an opening that he took, killing Alfarius in an incredibly brutal manner, before speaking to his dying chief bodyguard. He told Arcamus, with much more emotion than usual, that he had failed his son, but the Huskar replied that he was the Primarch's Praetorian before dying. Given Dorn was known as the Praetorian of Terra, I have to wonder how symbolically he took that. Arcamus was succeeded by Sergeant and fellow Huskar member Kestros, who was a faithful and trusted aide to the captain whilst he was alive. It's said he took on a new name in Arcamus' memory, but as we don't know what it was following his path post-heresy is rather kind of difficult. It's also unknown what became of the Huskars, especially following Dorn's death or disappearance. My guess is that they formed the initial First Company in the Codex-compliant Imperial Fist, with Kestros maybe becoming First Captain or even Chapter Master, depending on how you sort of organise Primarch to Chapter Master. Beyond that, no idea at all. I mean, the modern 8th Company are nicknamed Dorn's Huskars, but whether that's symbolic of anything is completely unclear. We shall conclude our look at the 7th Legion with a few miscellaneous tales of the Imperial Fists. The first is Lycus, a marshal of the Legion who fought at Fal, but like Alexis Polux, seemingly did not make it back to Terra. Instead, he ended up in what appeared to be Segmentum Tempestus based on where he ended up, but rather than head home, he spent his time travelling around, helping worlds to fortify their defences and contribute to the war effort for the heresy. He ended up dying on Talon during its invasion by the Iron Warriors. He survived the virus bombing that rendered the planet a toxic wasteland, but sacrificed himself defending an astropath so a defense signal could be sent to the wider Imperium. The battle that followed is renowned as one of the greatest tank battles in all of human history. A fellow member of the Retribution fleet was the Captain Amandus Tyr, also part of Dorn's advisors known collectively as the Stone Men. Whether they came up with it themselves or it was a moniker from the other legions, not sure, but I suspect the former given that the legion overall had received it as a nickname as well. Tyr was the individual, under orders from Polux, who led the boarding action on Perturabo's flagship the Iron Blood, with about 50 Terminators in tow. He was something of a hothead, being one of the advocates for breaking out of the warp storms rather than remaining in Fal, but he completed his mission and managed to make it to the bridge itself. Of course, a single likely weakened captain and a handful of Terminators would have never stood a chance against a Primarch, and Tyr was left bleeding out on the decks of the Iron Blood, likely without even landing a hit. Finally, I wish to mention the other individuals charged with leading the spheres of defence in Sol. As we've already stated, Dorn oversaw the fifth sphere, and Sigismund the first, whatever. The second, Jupiter, etc., was led by Halbrecht, captain of an unknown company and a professed skeptic regarding the testimony of Garrow and the Eisenstein. Nonetheless, he was obviously highly respected as he was held the rank of Fleet Master when the traitors came, implying he was Yonaz's replacement in the job given Polux also wasn't home, but his fate is unknown. The same can be said of Ephried, charged with overseeing the third sphere of defence, the blockade of Mars. He had the same thoughts regarding the Eisenstein, suggesting they may be the traitors themselves since their story about Horus was so unbelievable, but he obviously came around to the idea soon enough. Again, we don't know what happened to him. The fourth sphere, the run between Mars and Terra, was overseen by Camber Diaz, the other captain assigned to the operations on Mars with Sigismund. His half of the force actually ran into more trouble as they were sent to a forward that turned out to be traitor, but they got the resources and managed to get out with them. Like the other sphere commanders that aren't Dorn and Sigismund, we don't know Diaz's eventual fate. If he stuck to his post, I suspect he would have been killed by the traitor fleet, but he may well have got back to Terra or even fought in the Iron Cage. So end the tales of the Imperial Fists Legion. The 7th may not have basked in the same glory as the other Legion Astartes, but without them, the Imperium may well have been in a far weaker position even before their Horus Heresy broke out, not to mention their work on Terra itself. Though Rogal Dorn is seemingly long dead, his sons and their successors have done great work in his and the Emperor's name, and I'm sure that the Praetorian would be immensely impressed and proud despite his usual reservedness. And with that, we not only conclude our look at the 7th Legion, but we've also managed to reach the end of our Legions mini-series covering all 18 of them. We don't know enough about the lost ones to even speculate properly, so we're not going to cover them. It's been a big undertaking to explore the stories of the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy, but I've enjoyed every bit of it. I've learned a lot along the way, and I hope you have too. Honestly, I wasn't sure it'd be possible to pull all this off when I covered the Word Bearers all that time ago, but, well, here we are at the end. Obviously, this means we don't really have anywhere to go now since we've covered all the Legion worlds. I mean, I'm open to ideas, but since we're actually over Terra right now, I think I might give the Cradle of Humanity an explore, get off this place for a while. Especially the Imperial Palace. I bet there's a tale or two to tell in there. Yeah, why not? We're already orbiting possibly the most fortified planet in the Imperium. Let's get down there, see how we go. Thank you all for watching. My name is Michael for Tactica Imperialis, and I really hope you've enjoyed our Legions mini-series. I'll see you all again. Goodbye.